Hey guys, what is going on? Welcome to your overview of the dynasties of ancient China. When teaching this unit, I like to do all of the dynasties, even though the unit is on ancient China. I like to give a good overview of all the dynasties to put the dynastic system into perspective for the students as well. In this video, we're going to look at all the dynasties that existed during ancient China, right up to the very last dynasty, the Qing Dynasty, to show the overview of the dynastic system. So first up, we have the Qin Dynasty. They existed between 2070 BCE and 1600 BCE, and you can see the size of their dynasty there. So the Qin Dynasty is the first recorded dynasty in China. The Qin Dynasty may not have even existed. The evidence of its existence is still disputed. Yu the Great is believed to have founded the dynasty. Yu the Great got his name because he was able to tame the flooding of the Yellow River by digging canals to divert the water. And you can find more about the Qin Dynasty here. So I'll include this presentation in the description of the video if you want to access that information. Next up is the Shang Dynasty. So you can see it's gotten a little bigger. So the Shang existed between 1600 BCE and 1046 BCE. So a bit of background and information on their religion. So the Shang believed that nature was controlled by spirits and gods. They made offerings to them daily, including human sacrifice, who were more often than not prisoners of war. The Shang Dynasty came to an end when King Dynasty was overthrown because he was a cruel ruler, and the Zhou used what they called the Mandate of Heaven to justify their claim as the next dynasty. The Shang Dynasty, some of their achievements. So the Shang were masters of maths, astronomy, and one of the first societies to ever use calendars. The Shang were sophisticated artisans. They made a lot of items out of bronze, and especially jade. As a result, the Shang developed chariots and used them in battle. Here's a bit of a slideshow of all the jade stuff that the Shang produced. So we've got a jade deer, jade tiger, jade bird, jade dragon, jade fish, jade dragon again. Then we have the Zhou Dynasty. So we can see that they were really the masters of jade. Next up we have the Zhou. Now the Zhou were famous because they created the Mandate of Heaven, a philosophy that was used to judge the rulers until the Ming Dynasty. The Zhou developed agriculture, chariots, and musical developments, but these achievements were undone by the Qin Dynasty. Confucius, the famous philosopher, lived during the Zhou Dynasty, and his ideas became the official religion and belief system of China. During this time, Sun Tzu also wrote The Art of War. This book was about military tactics and is still read today, especially by people in business and commerce. Next up was the Qin Dynasty. So the Qing Dynasty was the first empire of China under a united empire, united by Qin Shi Huangdi after the Warring States period. So Qin Shi Huangdi was the first emperor of China. He was maybe the most famous person from ancient China. Qin Shi Huangdi ordered the construction of the Terracotta Army and the Great Wall of China by joining existing parts of the wall. He introduced a legalist rule and further perfected Chinese military techniques. So the Terracotta Army built to guard Qin Shi Huangdi in the afterlife. Qin Shi Huangdi wasn't sure what was going to meet him in the afterlife, but he wanted to have an army to protect him. Now, they were made out of clay because the Warring States period had just finished, and human sacrificing wasn't very cool anymore. So Qin Shi Huangdi said he wanted terracotta warriors instead of real-life people to be buried in his tomb with him to help guard him in the afterlife. So each soldier had their own individual face and features. So this makes it one of the most impressive architectural achievements ever. And there are over 8,000 statues in total. How they were made is still a debate. There was two ways that they could have been made, but for various reasons, including weather and climate and time constraints, it's still quite a debate on how they were actually made. They were once all painted, and of course, over time, the colour of the paint has faded, so it would have been quite magnificent to see them all fully painted. And they're made out of something called terracotta. So terracotta is a type of clay that is great for building materials and models. The Great Wall of China was built to protect China against the Mongols and other northern invaders, including the Huns from a long, long time ago. So the Great Wall of China is around 8,851 kilometers long. It's not like one long snake. It does divert into different parts. There are 7,000 towers along the Great Wall of China. The Great Wall of China covers many different types of terrain. So the Great Wall of China starts in the eastern region of China near the Yellow Sea and finishes in the Kunlun Mountains. The mountains act as a natural barrier. So really the Chinese connected up the Great Wall to the mountains, because the mountains were like a Great Wall that was already there. They just finished it off by making most of that barrier. Next up, we have the Han Dynasty. So Chinese people believe they are descendants of the Han Dynasty. The Han invented paper around 105 BCE, and they also developed one of the first seismographs, a device used for detecting earthquakes. They developed the Silk Road, which is a major trading route that connected much of Asia to China. Buddhism was introduced to China during the Han Dynasty as well. Now, the Silk Road was developed by the Han Dynasty and was one of the most significant things to be made during ancient China. It was used for centuries after the Han ended, and China really benefited from the Silk Road. So it was over 6,500 kilometers long. The most common items traded on the Silk Road were silk, jade, pottery, spices, and teas. China produced a lot of these items, mainly silk, so the Silk Road benefited them the most. So you can see on this map here, we've got the terrestrial map of the Silk Road in red, and then we've got the aquatic map. The Silk Road was also over water as well, and you can see that in the blue. Next up, we have Emperor Wu Di, who lived from 141 BC to 87 BCE. Emperor Wu Di was a famous emperor who lived during the Han Dynasty, and he is famous for starting public schools and reviving Chinese art. So a very significant person. Next up, we have the Qin Dynasty. So the Qin Dynasty was founded by Wang Mang. The Qing Dynasty interrupted the Liu's family succession during the Han Dynasty. So we can see in my danky little arrow here that it interrupted this Han period, but after that the Han took back over. After the Han finally ended, we have the Sui Dynasty. So we can see their dynasty was much smaller in terms of land size. So the Sui Dynasty introduced a unified coinage system. The Grand Canal was constructed. This was important because it allowed China to transport goods and services. The Grand Canal advanced ancient Chinese civilization in a little bit of a similar way that the Nile advanced ancient Egyptian civilization. The first dynasty to establish an army of professional soldiers, and then people were overworked and overtaxed during this dynasty as well. Grand Canal. So this is the Grand Canal by the end of the Tang Dynasty, but it was started by this dynasty. So next up we do have the Tang, so we can see their dynasty has expanded much more. So this dynasty were known for a practice called foot binding. Tea was introduced from Southeast Asia, and they re-established the safety of the Silk Road. So these are some other achievements of the Tang Dynasty. So they were known for the printing press, porcelain, gunpowder, mechanical clocks, and paper currency and checks. Very powerful empress. The only female emperor of China existed during the Tang Dynasty. She started out as a concubine and then ended up becoming Empress of China. This is Empress Wu. And Empress Wu was a ruthless and cruel leader. Empress Wu hired sadistic government officials and to find and eliminate her enemies. So she was a very, very ruthless person, but she had to be to get where she wanted to be. So this is the process of the foot binding practice during the Tang Dynasty. So what is foot binding? So foot binding is an ancient Chinese custom of wrapping women's feet with cloth in order to stop them from growing with age. Foot binding began during the Tang Dynasty and became widely popular during the Song Dynasty. Girls in the high court began to have their feet bound to show that they did not have to do much manual labour, and this was considered to be attractive. And when I teach this, I find that a lot of students are really perplexed on how this could be attractive, and I'm perplexed in the same way. But it's much like how cosmetic surgery, for example, is considered to be attractive today. This was considered to be attractive at the time. It's a very, very cruel and inhumane practice. That's why it ended up being banned, but it existed for a long time and caused a lot of people a lot of pain. So how were feet bound? So girls would begin having their feet bound by the age of 3. The toes would be broken and wrapped underneath the foot using linen, a very, very painful and inhumane process. The linen would be pulled tighter and tighter every night, and the ideal size for a woman's foot would only be 11 centimeters long, which is tiny. And you can see the diagram in the top left. That's how the foot originally looked, and then that's how it was shaped. And then we have an illustration of a woman binding her own feet. One of the problems with this is that people in lower classes of society wanted their daughters to marry rich. So what they would do was they would bind their feet, which was really a problem because then they'd go out and work on farms or go and walk the streets and stuff like that. So Foot binding was a really cruel and really inhumane process that happened to a lot of girls and a lot of women for a long time. It's important we remember these things as well. Mothers were the ones who bound their daughters' feet. It was believed women with bound feet were of a higher class and were more appealing to marry. We can see that here that's a model of the foot on the left, and then those were what the shoes looked like on the right. Next up we have the Song Dynasty. So the Song affirmed the merchant and middle class of the ancient Chinese social structure. They had a great emphasis on education. The magnetic compass was created and perfected during the dynasty, giving China the ability to move overseas, and rice cultivation began under the Song as well. So this is what rice cultivation looks like. These are rice paddies. You can make them on the edges of hills, and it's one of the reasons why there was so much rice in China. They had a very hilly landscape, so they had to use it wisely. Next up, we have the Yuan Dynasty. So what ended up happening was that Kublai Khan, one of the Mongols, the Mongol Khan, the leader of the great Khanate of the Mongol Empire, invaded China and took over and became part of the Mongol Empire. And we call this the Yuan Dynasty. So the Yuan Dynasty, also known as the Mongol Dynasty, began when Kublai Khan, leader of the Mongol Empire, took power from the Song Dynasty to become the first non-Chinese emperor of China. Some achievements of the Yuan Dynasty were the use of paper currency. They invented the teapot, advancements in the calendar and maths, and they also developed the movable printing press. So this is the great expanse of the Mongol Empire at its height in 1279 CE. It was the largest empire in terms of land. So a little bit about Kublai Khan. So Kublai Khan was the grandson of the mighty Genghis Khan. Kublai Khan was the leader, the great Khan of the Mongol Empire. Kublai founded the Yuan Dynasty when he became the emperor of China after defeating the Song in 1279 CE. Kublai was known as a very tolerant leader. While he was a ruthless leader in war, he was very tolerant of and interested in other cultures and religions. Under his rule, all religions were tolerated, even appointed foreigners like Marco Polo to rule over the Chinese. So what was the Mongol Empire known for? So they were known for warfare. They were a very brutal group of people, and that's what they were known for by other empires and other countries. The Mongol Empire was the largest empire in history, and later the Mongol Empire was known for trade and developing new military technologies and tactics. So a little bit about Marco Polo. So Marco Polo was an Italian from Venice who travelled from Europe to China along the Silk Road. Marco Polo spent 17 years with Kublai Khan. Kublai was fascinated by his culture and his knowledge of other places. Marco Polo brought back coal, gunpowder and noodles back to Europe, so that's quite significant in that regard too. Marco Polo is a significant person in history because he was one of the very first Europeans to explore China fully and document in his works known as the Travels of Marco Polo. What makes his journey more interesting is that he saw China through the lens of the Yuan Dynasty, a Mongol rule over China. So while he was exploring China, he was exploring a very, very different China to what it had been. So this is a map that's just a quick outline of Marco Polo's journey. So how he started in Venice, ended up in what we know now as Beijing, and then of course returning back to Venice. Next up we have the Ming Dynasty. So the Ming Dynasty were big on education. They made education cheap and books cheaper. This led to an explosion of people who could read and write, which advanced China overall. Silver was traded abundantly during the Ming Dynasty, and this led to other societies being interested in China and made Chinese products cheaper as a result. The Ming Dynasty was known as a golden age for Chinese art as well. Emperor Ming Taizu existed during this time as well. So Emperor Ming Taizu was the first emperor of the Ming Dynasty and overthrew the Yuan Dynasty by claiming the mandate of heaven during a time of the plague and famine, and took power from the Khan. His reign began in 1368 CE and it ended on his death in 1398 CE. Emperor Ming Taizu is known for rebuilding the Great Wall of China because he recognized that the Mongols were still a threat. He restored Confucianism as the main belief system of China. Next up we have Admiral Zhang He. So Admiral Zhang He was a famous Chinese explorer and naval commander during the Ming Dynasty. He would have had quite a brilliant life. His purpose was to travel abroad and learn about it, while promoting the glory and trading interests of Ming China. Admiral Zhang He expanded the global influence and identity of China, bringing back things like camels and giraffes to China. So all up he had 7 voyages On the right, you can see it's a model or a recreation of one of his, what they call treasure ships. So his first voyage was to Vietnam, Thailand, India, and Sumatra. Second voyage was to India. Third, Malaysia, Sri Lanka, India, Thailand, and Vietnam. You guys get the picture after that. But eventually, he did end up traveling to Africa, really expanding the knowledge of Chinese nobles as well as scholars as well. So he was quite a brilliant individual who led an extraordinary life and expanded the interest, image, and identity of China as well. Last, we have the Qing Dynasty. Last but certainly not least, we have the Qing Dynasty. So they lasted from 1641 CE to 1911 CE. So this is the last dynasty of ancient China and the dynastic system of China. It lasted for nearly 300 years and contained some famous emperors like Emperor Kangxi, the longest reigning emperor, 61 years, and Emperor Qianlong, an emperor who really didn't like ruling. The Opium Wars occurred during the Qing Dynasty. There were two Opium Wars where it was essentially China versus Britain. And in 1911, the Nationalist Party of China, founded by Sun Zhongshan, held an uprising in Wuchang, which caused several provinces to split from the empire. Within weeks, the Qing agreed to turn China into a republic. Pu left the throne, and Yuan Shikai became the first president of China, and that is how the dynastic system ended. So guys, I hope you've enjoyed this quick little summary of some of the people, achievements of the dynasties of ancient China, leading into medieval China, and then quite recent China as well. Really looking at the dynastic system, how it started, some of the famous dynasties that existed, and then all the dynasties right until the Qing Dynasty, which we're looking at here, and how the dynastic system eventually ended. Thanks for watching, and make sure you go ahead to subscribe to the YouTube channel if you enjoyed this resource and want to see more. Thank you.